Well, I'm back now in the Bournemouth Conference Centre and joined by Burt, the Lib Dem MP for Solihull and chairman of the party at Westminster, and Olly, Kendall, a former special advisor to Charles Kennedy. So welcome to you both. Olly, Kendall, first of all, is this tax proposal responsible? Will the public believe the Lib Dems?
Good evening, Caroline. Yes, it is responsible. It's not just responsible. It's fair, it's progressive, it's those two key words, social and justice. We as a party for the last 15 years or so have always been on the vanguard of fair taxation. And as we face what looks like to be economic decline in this country, there are many people on poor and low incomes who are struggling. They're struggling to pay their food bills, they're struggling to pay their energy bills, they're struggling to pay mortgages. And this tax break is aimed at helping those people through what we think will be probably a very difficult time.
But Olly, what does it mean, though, if in order to get this through by offering tax cuts, then you have to abandon one of your key policies like scrapping tuition fees, which served you well in university towns at the last election?
OK, as far as tax cuts are concerned, we're not saying that there definitely will be tax cuts. What we're going to do is reprioritise some of the existing government spending so that, for example, we'll scrap ID cards and we'll get more police on the streets.
But any money left over after the reallocation will go in tax cuts. That's the clear message from the leadership.
It is, but because the economic situation is quite precarious at the moment, I don't think anyone, unless you've got a crystal ball there, Caroline, we're not going to be able to exactly forecast how that's going to pan out.
Well, you're saying something different to Vince Cable and Nick Clegg. And as you heard Simon Titley there saying, Olly, it's very complicated, isn't it? Why can't you come up with a policy that's easy to explain in one sentence?
Well, I think it's fairly easy to explain, but I think the issue...
I defy you to explain it, but I'm not asking you to now.
Well, I will rise to your challenge, Caroline. I will give it a go. We have very clear spending priorities on increasing the numbers of police officers, on reducing school class sizes and so forth. If we can make and meet those spending priorities through finding government cuts, then the rest of that money will go on to helping people on poor and low incomes by slashing the lowest rate of income tax from 16p, from 20p to 16p.
Oh, well, that's a different policy you're talking about now, and this is where the confusion arises, and I'm not going to get into two different tax policies that are being discussed, but let's look at some of the controversial things that have been saying. Vince Cable, for example, your economic spokesman tomorrow, is going to say in his speech, we expect him to say, the gravy train of management, consultancy and government should be stopped, and he's saying every non-frontline public sector employee on full-time equivalent of £100,000 salary should reapply for their jobs and take a pay cut.
I think Vince is flying a kite with this one, but I think what the Lib Dems are all about is getting bang for taxpayers' buck, and it would be absolutely irresponsible not to look at every single option within the public sector to make sure that there is value for the taxpayers' money. And obviously this is something that he's talking about tomorrow. I've no doubt that perhaps at future conferences will be something that will be discussed a little bit more seriously by members as well.
The strategy of targeting Labour seats, Olly, when you have a policy like this, isn't this now going to give Labour MPs the chance to say, look at the Lib Dems, they're just going to cut public spending, there are going to be departmental sufferings there?
Well, it depends on where you're coming from. Labour have squandered a lot of money. We've now got an army of unelected fat cats who are running quangos. So I think it's absolutely right, that Vince says we need to look at this root and branch and, start cutting from the top down to size, not take the coward's way out and penalise low-paid workers.
All right, but writing in Liberator magazine, the party's former head of policy, Richard Grayson, has said that rather than cut spending, you actually need to spend more on pensions, public transport, scrapping tuition fees. And he's asking if Nick Clegg really believes that the party can achieve these aims with less spending.
Well, as you said earlier on, Caroline, there are two separate tax policies here. The important thing, I think, that we're seeking to do is to spend the money where it's most effective.
But they're difficult to sell, these policies. This is at the nub of this. It's why many of your activists out there are saying it's too complicated, it hasn't been explained clearly.
I don't think saying we'll make the rich pay more tax and we'll make the poor pay less tax and middle-income families pay less tax seats so that they've got more money in their pocket. I don't think that's going to be a difficult policy to sell.
So what do you make of what Vince Cable's expected to say tonight? It's pretty controversial, isn't
Well,
it?
it is, and that's Vince for you, you know. I certainly think that he's certainly got a point. But we'll just have to see, you know, how it's accepted by the people on the conference floor.
Olly, don't you think that the idea of targeting Labour seats with a policy like this is perhaps a bit wrong? Wouldn't you be better off targeting Conservative seats with a policy like that? Wouldn't it go down better in those?
The Lib Dems have got a history of essentially targeting both other parties on both flanks. We're the most experienced at doing this. We've got up to more than 60 MPs because we've effectively targeted Conservative seats often in the south of England and Labour seats in the Midlands and the north. And I think if you're saying that a tax cut to help the lowest or the poorest in society is something that won't appeal across the board, then I think you're very wrong. I think there are people throughout the country, whether they're in Eastleigh and Winchester seats, which obviously we're defending against the Conservatives, or indeed in Liverpool or Newcastle areas where we'll hope to pick up gains from Labour. I think in all those places, the idea of tax cuts to help people on lower middle income, it really resonates.
But you would acknowledge, wouldn't you, that he's trying to win with Tory policies in Labour areas, and that's not going to work.
Absolutely not. Let's define tax cuts, shall we? And let's be very clear on what this means. The Conservatives are talking about tax cuts, but they're tax cuts to help the rich. They're tax cuts to change the threshold of inheritance tax, which will help people who inherit estates of £2 million. That is not something that I don't think many of your listeners today will recognise. Our tax cuts are to help the poorest people. There is a very big difference. And Nick Clegg's job at this, if I can just finish, at this conference is to be very clear about how we differentiate ourselves in terms of that progressive, fair taxation from the Conservatives.
Olly, on the broader targeting strategy, what about Charles Clarke's point then that if you do furiously target these 50 seats, you're inevitably going to create more Conservative MPs?
Well, we're targeting Conservative seats as well. We're not just abandoning what
But answer
we're doing.
Charles Clarke's point.
Well, I think the Conservatives, they're going to have to achieve at least a 10-point change in elections in order to be able to win an overall majority. That's quite a big ask. It's not going to be a 20-point lead, as we've got at the moment, when it actually comes to the next general election. So I think that a good tide of Liberal Democrat seats is actually going to be extremely helpful, because it will stand in the way of a Conservative overall majority.
All right, well, we'll wait to see tomorrow afternoon whether the leadership get their way with a tax vote. Burt and Olly Kendall, thank you.